Today we're going to talk about what you have to do after filing a lawsuit to get it started. That's called service of process. Hey, I'm Joel. This is Jared from Williams, ELLEBY HOWARD Easter. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So why don't we jump right into it, Jared? You tell us what service actually is.
So service is when you actually serve the lawsuit on the defendant, the person you're suing. It's basically the way of putting them on notice that the lawsuit is taking place, that they're being sued, and more specifically, legally speaking, it is obtaining jurisdiction over the person that you're suing so that you can bring them into court and make them essentially answer the lawsuit and hold them accountable if and when you're able to get a verdict against them.
Yep, that's right. You can't just file a lawsuit and not let the other person know that they're being sued. So you could be suing individual persons, you could be suing corporations, you could be suing partnerships, all kinds of different legal entities. And there are certain ways that you have to go about doing that. So when you get ready to serve somebody after you filed a lawsuit, basically you're going to file the lawsuit, and in Georgia, and we're specifically talking about Georgia law here, in Georgia, the clerk is going to issue what we call a summons. And then the lawsuit and that summons is going to be served on the person or persons that you're suing. And there's only certain people that can do the service. The first is the sheriff of the county where that person is residing. So if you file a lawsuit in, say, Cobb County, and everybody lives in Cobb County, then the Cobb County Sheriff's Office can serve everybody. But if you are serving one person in Cobb County, but the other person lives in Fulton County, then you can use the sheriff in Cobb County to serve the Cobb County resident, but you got to get someone in Fulton County to serve the Fulton County resident. And sometimes that's where certified process servers come into play. So individuals that are 18 years of older and have passed through these certain qualifications can be certified as process servers in Georgia, and they can come in really handy when you're suing someone in a county where the lawsuit is not pending. So typically if we were suing somebody in Cobb County and somebody in Fulton County, if we file the case in Cobb, then we may have the sheriff serve it in Cobb, and we may hire a private process server, certified process server, to serve it in Fulton. So there's certain ways that these people, or the plaintiff in this case, can serve the person or persons that they're suing. So let's go through those real quick, Jared.
All right, so the first one is personal service. When you sue an individual, if I were to sue Joel, the sheriff or a private process server would need to serve him with the complaint. And it sounds more complicated than what it is. It's really just kind of locating Joel, personally handing him the summons and the complaint, and acknowledging that Joel is the person, in fact, that we're trying to get served. You can also serve personally with someone who's over the age of 18 that lives in the same household that Joel or the defendant lives in. So that could be a spouse or children. There's some case law out there that would allow you to serve a minor child on behalf of the parent. That gets a little more dicey as to whether it's good service or not, because you have to get more into the weeds about how old the child is and whether they were of an age that they could provide the documents to the adult that's trying to be served in order to have good service.
Yeah, I think the law calls it of suitable age and discretion, right? So if you're 4, then you probably don't have the discretion, but if you're 17, maybe you do. Okay, so the second way to serve somebody is if it's a corporation. A corporation's not a person, right? But it's kind of made up of people. And in Georgia, you can serve the president, an officer of the corporation, a managing agent of the corporation. But most commonly, the entity or the person that we serve is the registered agent. So anytime a corporation is formed in the state, then they have to designate a registered agent to accept legal service of process on the corporation's behalf. And that's usually the easiest one to do, because you just go to the Secretary of State's website, figure out who the registered agent is, and then have the sheriff or a private process server serve them there.
And then third is service by publication. So this is a little different. This is, you can serve by publication in a few certain instances. One is if the person you're trying to serve resides out of state or has left the state, or if the person you're trying to serve is actively concealing themselves. So sometimes people think that it's a good idea to will avoid the lawsuit by just not getting served. So they won't come to the door. They'll try to, not come home at normal hours or do things like that to try to avoid the sheriff or the process server and hopefully just avoid the lawsuit in general. So in those situations, you can go to the court and you can basically petition the court to serve by publication, where essentially they run an ad in the legal newspaper in the county where the person resides, and then hopefully, I guess the theory is that they see it and that they know they're served. I don't know who reads those things, but they do it. It has to run for, I think, 60 days, 90 days?
Yeah, I think it's so many weeks. Yeah.
So many weeks. So, but in order to do that, the caveat is you have to, if the person doesn't reside out of state, you have to prove that or have some evidence that they're concealing themselves, which sometimes can be difficult, but you usually do that by filing an affidavit to show the steps we've taken to hire process servers to go out looking for them, and then also an affidavit from the process server with some sort of information. The process server says, I called them on the phone, I told them what's going on, and they still won't make themselves available. They either run inside and lock the door when I try to hand them the papers, or they won't come meet me somewhere to get served. So if you can, check that box and prove that they are concealing themselves, then usually a judge will grant your motion for service by publication. You run it for the requisite number of weeks in the newspaper, and then the defendant is deemed served for the purposes of the lawsuit.
Yep. And there's a few other details that go along with that where you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, but if you're really interested in that, you can go look at OCGA 911-4, and it'll list out all of those details for you. Another situation where service is a little different is if you're serving a minor. In those situations, it's pretty simple. You need to serve the minor, and you need to serve either their mom, dad, guardian, or guardian ad litem if one's been appointed. The only exception to that is if the minor happens to be married, then you do not serve the parents or the guardian. You just serve the minor. So minor service is pretty simple.
Yep. And then another form of service is serving a city or county, state government. In those situations, the statutes generally specify certain people that have to be served, be it the chairman of the board of commissioners, the mayor, the city manager, or maybe another agent authorized to receive service on behalf of that governmental entity.
Yep. And the last method that we're going to go over today is waiver, and it's quite simply the simplest.
It's the best.
Yep, you know who it is. You send a form to them asking them to waive service. If they agree to it, then in exchange for them agreeing to waive service and saving you the cost of paying the sheriff, paying the process server, then they get extra time to answer, usually 60 days. I think in some situations it may be 90 days, but typically it's 60 days in the state of Georgia. So they get more time to answer if they agree to waive service. If you follow the right steps and they don't agree to waive service, then there's a method by which you can go about recouping the extra cost from them that you incur in order to get them served. Yeah. So we've assumed up to this point that everybody that we're serving is in the state of Georgia. Sometimes they're not, right? So sometimes it might be a lawsuit that should be filed in Georgia, but the person cannot be located within the state. So you can still perfect service on those people. Whether it's valid and subjects them to the jurisdiction of the Georgia court's a different story, but typically if they're a Georgia resident, you can serve them anywhere. And they're still going to be subject to the jurisdiction of the court in the county where they reside in the state of Georgia. There's also another situation where you can serve somebody that resides out of state, but the court in Georgia would still get jurisdiction, and that's when it's an action involving real property. So if you've got a block of land or a house or something like that, and there's a legal dispute over it, if the defendant lives in Tennessee, you can serve them up there, and they're still going to be subject to courts in Georgia.
So another interesting issue that can come up from time to time is when the person you're trying to serve lives in a gated community. They can't just hide in their gated community and never get service. The Georgia law allows that basically a process server or the sheriff is allowed temporary access to a gated community during reasonable hours in order to perfect service or try to locate a defendant.
All right, so another sticky situation is if the person that you're trying to serve is not in the United States. What if they're in a foreign country? We do run into this from time to time, and sometimes we run into it with foreign corporations. So there are international treaties. One that specifically comes to mind is called the Hague Convention, that sets forth specific rules that I am not about to try to go into in this video, because I have to go back and read the terms of the convention's treaty every single time, because it just doesn't come up a lot. But there are ways to go about perfecting service on someone who's in a foreign country if there's agreements between the two countries that allow that to happen. If there's not an agreement between the United States and that foreign country, then typically Georgia is going to defer to the laws of that foreign country. So you have to follow the foreign country's laws to perfect service on the individual or the business that you're trying to serve.
And then the last step is, what do you do once you get them served? So once we locate the person and serve them through whichever method, depending on whether it's a person, corporation, minor, etc., you file what's called an affidavit of service. And that is just a sworn affidavit by the person who made the service, whether it's a private process server or the sheriff. You file that with the court, essentially just saying, you know, I, John Smith, on this day served Joel Williams at this place. You give the address and when it happened, and then just file that sworn statement with the court so that the court knows that service has been perfected, and then that will trigger the timelines for the defendant to file his answer and begin the litigation process.
Yep. So kind of a meaty topic today, but the main point that we want you to understand is that you can't just file a lawsuit and let it ride. You have to file the lawsuit, and you have to serve the lawsuit and the summons on the person or persons that you're serving or that you're suing. And then there's various ways that you can do that. So even if you try to serve somebody and you can't find them, there's alternate ways to go about doing that in the state of Georgia. Now, understand the rules are slightly different for federal court. I'm sure that the laws are very different from state to state. So if you are getting into a lawsuit, this is just another reason that you need to have an attorney to represent you in that lawsuit, because that attorney in your state that's licensed in your state is going to know the specific rules on how to go about perfecting service. Because if you don't perfect service on the defendant, you might as well have not filed the lawsuit, because it's no good until service is perfected. So all in all, those are some rules for the state of Georgia. We hope this video has been helpful to you. If so, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, we will see you next week, where we will talk about pre-suit demand letters and automobile accident cases in Georgia. As personal injury lawyers, we love what we do, and we're happy to share the experience we've gained in personal injury law. To help our family, friends, and YouTube subscribers, we've shared over 300 personal injury videos covering various injury topics. So if you'd like to gain more knowledge that may help protect yourself or a loved one when they're on the roads or out in public, check out our channel or view our playlist of shorts for quick personal injury tips.